Every year, thousands of people move to Fort Worth chasing new opportunities, a lower cost of living, and that Texas lifestyle you've probably heard about. But there's one really big mistake that a lot of people don't realize they're making until it's too late. So today I'm going to break down the biggest mistakes people make when they're moving to Fort Worth, and we're also going to cover the little things that cause some of the biggest regrets, like picking the wrong suburb, buying the wrong communities, and simply just misjudging commute time. So stick around, because the biggest mistake, it's the one that most people really never see coming. I call it the property tax bomb. And what I'm talking about is when you're buying new construction in Fort Worth, Texas, at the beginning of it, the county is assessing your property taxes on the land alone. So you might get your closing statement and you're buying a $600,000 home. It's quite possible the tax bill is only $2,000 a year. And you're thinking, oh, I just won the property tax lottery. You didn't win the property tax lottery. What's happening is you're only being taxed on the land. And so the county is going to, and it might take somewhere between 12, 18 months, maybe 24 months in some cases before the taxes are caught up to where they should be. And overnight, when that happens, your taxes can jump 300 to 500% of what they were. So you're paying $2,000 a year, and that easily could go to 10, 12, 15,000. We've seen it jump quite a bit. So that property tax bomb is one of the big things you got to look for when you're buying new construction. The only other time we'll see something like that with existing homes is when the property value by the county is assessed incredibly low, well below market value. That doesn't happen often. It does occasionally, but it's very rare. It doesn't happen that much. The next thing that you need to be aware of is the homestead exemption. It will help some, but it's not going to make, it's not going to cut it by like half, but it can make a huge difference. And there also is one thing I need to mention too. If you're a veteran and you have a VA disability, especially if it's 100% and you're not aware of this, you need to know that in Texas, I don't know about other states, but I know for sure in Texas, if you're a veteran and it's your primary residence, your property taxes are waived when you have a VA disability at 100%. So that's an important detail to know for the veterans out there. So homestead exemption, that applies to most of the tax entities. So when we talk about tax rate averages around 1.7 to 2%, there are some areas where the taxes are higher. We'll get into that in a minute, but the homestead exemption applies a reduction on the tax value. So if you're taxed at $600,000, that's the value the county assesses. The homestead exemption will come in and drop that. The school tax exemption is now at $100,000. And there's some areas that are giving above that. So that's a really important thing to know. And you can file that as soon as you are the owner of record, usually 3 to 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, somewhere in there from the time you close. So it's a really important detail to know. But in addition to the property tax bomb, the next big mistake that we see is people misunderstanding or just not recognizing the commute that they're going to be making in their daily life. And, this is usually folks that haven't worked with us. It might be somebody that gets referred to us from one of our clients, but most of the time we see this from folks that are working outside of our team. And so the drastic difference between come out, especially if you're from out of town, you come in on the weekend, that's really common. Everything's wonderful. The weekend traffic's usually not that bad. And you think, oh, this is, a cakewalk. If you're looking at buying in Prosper or Frisco, or if you're in the middle of Keller, Texas, and you've got to go to either one of the downtown, Dallas or Fort Worth, that commute's going to be 2 or 3 times what it would be on the weekend versus going out on the week. So our recommendation is, when you come in to look at property, especially if you're from out of town, take an extra day. If you're not going to be here during the week, add 1 extra day before you leave, Monday, or come out Friday. That way you can drive. Like if you're serious about a neighborhood and you want to know what is this commute actually going to look like, that's an important thing to do, because you'll get a real life experience of, okay, if I lived here, this is what my commute's going to be like if you're going to be working and commuting. So obviously, if you're not commuting, it doesn't matter. So that also kind of leads us into the next thing, which is selling too soon. So, the one reason, especially for folks that are new to Texas, why they would sell is they're unhappy with the commute. If you're selling inside 3 to 5 years, it's really difficult to break even on that property. It's a rare thing that we see folks able to sell within 3 to 5 years from the time they purchase, because you've got costs to sell the house. If you're talking about a $500,000 home, on average, at least 30 grand, realtor fees, title fees, closing costs on the seller side, you got to give a tax proration to the buyer. So there's expenses that go into it. And most people, they're not buying, we generally don't recommend buying, especially if it's where you're going to live, buying a home and staying there for less than 5 years. Like, that just doesn't make sense. But again, these are scenarios that people are coming to us and asking for help because they either didn't do the research or the people they were working with didn't inform them and give them additional things to think about. So selling too soon, it can cost you an arm and a leg. So it's something to look out for. The other reason with selling too soon is the school zone. Then this leads into something personal for me. So you back up like 15 years ago, we were living in a community and it was great, new construction, new schools. Like, literally the elementary school was 2 blocks from our house, maybe 2.5 blocks. Like, it was just right there. Okay, so fast forward, like, we were in the house, I think 3.5 years. We get a notice from the school district. They're redrawing boundary lines. I didn't even know what that meant at the time. And boy, did I learn my lesson. We didn't do research. Nobody said anything. I was completely unaware that this was even a thing. I'd heard of it, but I didn't really understand what it meant. And so not only did we fight against it, me and gosh, it felt like there were a dozen dads. We went in every single house getting a petition to get the district to not change it because it was going to break up. There were families that it didn't make any logical sense. So the point of what I'm saying is, if you're buying a new construction, there's a strong chance, because there's been so much rapid growth, almost every school district is feeling the growing pains from that. So if you're buying new construction, there's a strong chance the school campuses that you think you're going to go to, if there are older subdivisions close by, older campuses close by, there may be changes. So I guess the takeaway for this would be just do some research and ask those questions. If you have school age kids and you want to make sure you're not getting pushed around when something changes, or be aware that there are changes coming and be prepared for that. Timing of when you close, scheduling movers, all of those things are so important. And a great example of that is this. So we had some folks moving from out of town and they were selling a property. When they sold their property, they thought they had everything lined up, and the lender they were working with, they missed a material detail and it delayed closing like 2 days. Well, it just so happened this particular mover was booked solid. They didn't have capacity to do anything. And so they closed, but then all their stuff, it was just sitting in storage, and they literally had to live out of an Airbnb for like 2 weeks before they could. So my point is, just make sure everything's buttoned up. Make sure you're working with a lender and that is paying attention to the details, because that matters, especially when you're moving from out of state. I mean, we've seen folks living out of a camper for a few weeks, Airbnb, staying with friends, relatives, and all that can be a really fun adventure until you add enough time. You put enough time behind it and it becomes a nightmare. Like, no one wants to live out of a camper long term. Nobody wants to live out of an Airbnb. Like, you can have some fun with it, make the most of it, staying with some friends for a few days, but it turns into weeks or a month. Yeah, I'm sure you know somebody just like me that knows someone who's gone through something like that. So if you're moving from out of state, paying attention to the details, making sure things are scheduled properly, working with the right team to advise you and make you aware of some of the things to look out for. And the next thing I want to talk about is why waiting costs more. And it's a pretty simple concept when you consider just buying a $500,000 home. And at today's interest rates in the mid sixes, if you refinanced, if you bought right now and then you refinanced, whenever interest rates, maybe 2 years from now, rates will be low enough to where it'll make sense. Maybe 6 months, maybe 6 weeks. Nobody really knows. By the way, just a quick side note, if somebody's telling you interest rates are going to drop, they don't know. Nobody does. If anybody knew, they wouldn't be talking about it on TV. They would have so much business, they wouldn't have time to talk to anybody. Okay, so my point is, if you buy now, that home's going to appreciate. With average appreciation in a couple of years, you're going to be paying $25,000 to $45,000 more for that $500,000 home is now going to cost you $540,000, $550,000. Maybe not quite that much, but you get the idea. And then if rates drop, in the meantime, that house, it's going to appreciate more than how much homes are appreciating for right now. If rates drop to 6 or a little below 6 and stay there, we will have another land rush on properties. I can promise you that. Nobody knows when or if that is actually going to happen, but if it does, you will be thinking, oh wow, I really wish I would have bought when I saw Sean's video because he was right. Okay. Now, with all that said, the hidden costs, it's layered with a couple of things. One, it can be that you didn't know about the unimproved taxes just being taxed on the land, and then you get hit with that surprise, that wonderful surprise a year later, 18 months later, 24 months later, and you got the tax bomb sitting in front of you. What I see people picking neighborhoods because it's the trendy neighborhood versus picking it based on daily lifestyle, where they're going to commute, where the kids are going to go to school. And there's some areas where you don't get to pick your utilities. And so that's an important thing too. For the most part, a lot of areas in Texas, you got the freedom to choose who your electricity provider is. Some areas you can choose who your natural gas provider will be. But those are some things to look for. And in the summertime, be prepared for that. Something else to pay attention to as well, Texas utilities for energy, for electricity. I like any kind of naturally supplied energy. The windmill farms and all that sound great on paper, but when you start looking at the details of those plans, sometimes they're not as cracked up as they appear to be. So actually, we've been on a month-to-month plan with Reliant. There was only a couple of months, about 3 years ago, where we got hit pretty hard with electric costs, but on average, I'm not locked into any specific time frame, and it's it fluctuates a little bit month to month. But in the summertime, we've got a almost 4,000 square foot home, and our utility costs, I think the highest outside of that one spike summer, the highest is like 425, 450 for maybe 2 months, and then it's back down below 300 most of the time. But paying attention to the utilities, that's another hidden cost that I would advise understanding what all needs to get turned on. That was another mistake when the house with the school district issue, that was another mistake I made. I didn't know we had natural gas. Okay, so paying attention to the utilities. And then the last thing on hidden costs would be insurance, not just for your home, but your cars. The home insurance and car insurance in Texas, the rates have gone up, plain and simple. A lot of my colleagues in the industry don't like to talk about the negative side of buying properties in Texas, but this is definitely a negative side. It's an expense. The upside to living here, though, outweighs all the negatives. It just does, period. The economy, the ease of access to everything, entertainment, airport, like you've got like 3 different major airports that you can pick from. Entertainment, out the wazoo. Like there's live concerts, live music, local cover bands, local tribute bands. I don't know that you'll find a better scene for entertainment than North Texas, where it's this easy to get to and there's always something going on. Yeah, we have crazy hot summers sometimes. Yeah, we have crazy cold crazy cold winters sometimes. But really, at the end of the day, the convenience, the lifestyle, the freedom that we have in Texas in comparison to some of the other areas where you get taxed a lot for this and regulated for that. You know, if you're an entrepreneur, Texas is the place to be. Like you just look at some of the industry leaders who have moved their headquarters here. Texas favors entrepreneurship. So if you own a business and you have the ability to set up shop in Texas, I would encourage you to do that. There are some great tax incentives for that. So, you know, one thing I will just say in closing is I've lived here for almost 50 years and Fort Worth is an amazing city. You're going to love it. You just will. The culture, the food's amazing. Like Tex-Mex is the best Mexican food. I'm sorry. I will die on that hill. It is absolutely the best. And from Joe T. Garcia's to Esparza's in Grapevine, Mi Cocina and South Lake, like all these places, like those are my favorites, absolute favorites. But I appreciate you guys spending time with me.